Hello, everybody. This is Joe Marion from ASCDI. I want to thank you all for joining us for this ITAD webinar. Uh, when I first, a few years ago, when I first heard the word ITAD, I thought to myself, what's the big deal? ITAD is probably just a new name for what the members of our industry have done for 30 years. I found hundreds of companies on the internet who all said they were ITAD companies, but they were really nothing more than buy-sell companies. And then I started to speak to some of our members who had become ITAD certified. Um, they explained to me that they were not like the alleged companies on the internet that said they were ITAD certified, and that in fact they were real ITAD companies. So now I was really confused, and I spent a good deal of time this year investigating ITAD. What I found is something that I believe is going to be a fundamental change to the buy-sell service industry that most of us are in. Much of the change is being driven by environmental and data privacy laws, and those laws are creating a tremendous opportunity for our members. Picture a world in which somebody calls you up and they say, I have 50 servers I want to sell you, and you say to them, you know what, you've got a problem, and you go on to tell them about their exposure to environmental and data privacy violations, and you say, tell you what I'll do, I'll pick them up for $50 a unit. And then the next question from your customer is, well, how do I know that you can dispose of them properly? And you say, well, because I'm certified. Well, I'm pleased to introduce two guests that we have today who know a lot more about ITAD than I do. The first is Reich Sandlin, who's an ITAD consultant. Before founding his consulting company, Reich was the chief operating officer of High-Tech Assets, which was a leading IT asset recovery company. Reich's been recognized by his appointments to several certifying bodies. He was the co-chair of the R2 Technical Advisory Committee. He was the chairman of the RIOS Board of Directors. He was the chair of ISRI's Certification and Standards Committee. And he also previously served as the Environmental Affairs Director for Arrow Electronics ITAD division. And we have Steve Mellons, who's ASCDI's partner in ITAD certification. Steve is the CEO of ADISA, which is a government-recognized certification program for asset disposition. Steve worked with the UK Information Commissioner's Office. He's also the author of the National Computer Center Guidance Notes on how to manage risk when disposing of assets. Now, we have a lot of people on the call today, so what we're going to do is mute everybody, but I ask you to text any questions you might have to Karen McGoy. You'll see on your portal, there's an option to text to Karen McGoy. Text the messages. Karen will collect them, and then at the end of the call, we'll go through those questions. With that, let me turn it over to Reich.
Thanks, Joe, and great introduction there. Good morning, everyone. Reich Sandlin with you here. Joe, if we can move on to slide 3. So my background has been pretty varied. Starting my career in automotive manufacturing, I headed up product development and product marketing for Verizon's wireless data division. I was part of the Integra roll-up of the ITAD industry back in the mid-2000s, which eventually was sold to Arrow Electronics, and I was involved there for a bit. And then more recently, High-Tech Assets, as Joe mentioned, which was able to grow and eventually sell to a private equity firm. And Integra and High-Tech both were very involved in what we call ITAD services, and so we'll get deeper into that later in the presentation. So for the past year, I've been consulting, helping companies figure out how to grow, how to scale, how to be more professional in their marketing strategy and their operations strategy in the ITAD space. Joe, let's move on to the next slide. So Joe asked me to put together a briefing for you on ITAD 101, really. What is ITAD? This is what we'll go through today. What does it mean to your tech resale and service business that you already have in place? What do you need to do to become certified? So I'll touch on that, and then Steve will go into more depth on that later. Can I really get paid to pick up hardware instead of paying for it? The short answer is yes, and we'll go into more detail on that as well. So in the early 2000s, Gartner and others started promoting this term IT asset disposition, or ITAD for short. It's outsourced services that corporations need for retirement of their assets. So rather than do it themselves, they outsource this to expert service providers. The term disposition is important. In the U.S., at least, the term disposal is one that's associated with waste, with landfills, with hazardous waste, those sort of things, and so it carries a lot of legal burden with it if you talk about and use the term disposal in your business. So the industry has moved towards disposition as the right term, because it really has to do with the decision. It has to do with the equipment that is sent to you. Is it disposed of? No, it's not waste. It's not necessarily end of life. It's something that you hope you can reuse. And so until that decision is made, that disposition decision, you don't want to refer to it as anything related to waste. So next slide. Continuing with what is ITAD. So the services that have been categorized in ITAD relate to reverse logistics, so the decommissioning, transportation, logistics segment of getting that equipment out of wherever it's in service and to you, to someone that is going to provide the ITAD service. Next is the data sanitization, so related to erasure, destruction of the drives and data-bearing devices. Testing and resale of the equipment to make sure that what is resold, what is put into the reuse or secondary market is working, is good, and is viable. Or if it's not, making that disposition decision to move it to a proper recycling chain, one that is compliant and ensures that the risks are eliminated. And then lastly, comprehensive reporting. So these are those core set of services. And when you think about what the deliverable is, in a typical business relationship, you have a deliverable and a product that you're selling or something like that. And so in ITAD, the client that you're serving doesn't really get anything back other than maybe a check and a report. So that report is crucial. That is your deliverable. That is the proof that you actually did something for them. So that's really important. As we move on to the next slide, why do corporations need to outsource this? Because some don't. Some try to do the ITAD process internally, but they need to outsource because it's risk mitigation, both data risks and environmental risks. But the key risk is brand, and I'll get to that in a bit more depth in a moment. The liability associated with asset retirement, the expertise that you or the ITAD service provider has to be able to do a good job and make those decisions, or in the remarketing capability, the ability to find secondary markets for the equipment. These are things that are not in the core competencies of many corporations, and so it's important for them to leverage your expertise in these areas. And I say some don't to their detriment. When we think about ITAD certifications, ISO 9001 or RIOS is a quality management system, and there are studies in the industry that have shown that as many as 40% of hard drives that corporations think they erase internally are not erased. They still contain data. That's a huge risk that they're taking on that they don't really understand when they're doing this internally, because many ITAD companies are certified, ITAD processors are certified, and they have the quality management systems in place to ensure that every drive is wiped or destroyed. All of that data is erased in a proper and best practice manner and you've got checks and balances to make sure that that happens, because that data is mission critical. That data is what you're betting the farm on, and you really must ensure that that's dealt with. And so those corporations that think they do it themselves, sometimes they have an intern sitting in a closet that when he has time, they'll send him in there to wipe some drives, and he'll do a few, and then they'll get called off on some other task. Or that sort of approach is not a strong systemic way of ensuring that data is destroyed. That's why they've got that 40% leakage number of what goes out. So Joe mentioned that this term ITAD on the next slide has a lot of different meanings. A lot of different people look at it in different ways. It's really broadened in recent years, and so people are using the term ITAD for just about anything related to reuse or refurbishing in both in the consumer space and the corporate space. So they get cell phones from a carrier or a retail outlet that are returned, and they do a refurbishment process and resell those, and they think that that's ITAD. Well, I'm not saying that what they're doing isn't professional and strong, but is it really an IT asset disposition service? Or is it something else? And so what we're going to talk about today is that set of ITAD services that corporations need for you to provide. That's why, as Joe mentioned, you're going to get this service from them, and you need to understand the risks that you're eliminating for them. The value of the service, the reason they're going to pay you to take it, is related to their risk. So it is fundamentally a B2B risk mitigation strategy. So what are those risks? First and foremost, data, both proprietary data, confidential data, personal information. We hear about hospitals and HIPAA and insurance companies and HIPAA. We hear about corporations and credit cards, corporations, and other information that they have on you and me. And so I want my corporation that I do business with to secure that data. They also have compliance obligations related to the regulations around data privacy. GDPR in Europe especially has had effects throughout the world, affecting corporations and how they deal with data. California has recently introduced legislation. New York has, and other states are looking at it as well. So these corporations are under a big compliance burden related to data. On the environmental side, 26 different states plus the federal government have rules and regulations around recycling and what can be considered waste and hazardous waste. And so these corporations have risk related to what happens with this equipment as it moves downstream. So that is part of the ITAD service, is eliminating that risk. But ultimately, it's brand. And Gartner, the big research firm, has mentioned this as well. That brand is potentially the most important aspect of the service that we provide. An example is Target. Now, Target went through a huge data breach a few years ago. That was due to hacking. It wasn't an ITAD issue, but it's a great example of the risks and the pain that a corporation deals with, because Target paid out millions in fines. Target paid out even more than that in consumer protection, credit monitoring services, that sort of thing. But the biggest impact to Target from that data breach was the impact to their brand. Consumers lost confidence in the brand. Consumers stopped going to Target because of that. Target became, you see it on the slide, their brand is related to the risk of improper data management. And so that's what these major corporations and mid-sized businesses as well are concerned about. If they understand their risks, they're worried about their brand. That's what keeps the CEOs up at night. So what does it mean to your business? Many of you on this call are already well down the path of providing services. That's one of the things I really was intrigued when I first was introduced to ASCDI by Joe, is that you're already in the service business with maintenance services, break fix, deployment services, and others. Itad is another set of services that is in your toolbox, or an arrow in your quiver. But what I say here is don't underestimate it. It's a significant thing to undertake. It's not something that you should trivialize in terms of just adding, hey, I can do Itad service too. There's a lot to it to do it well, to do it right, to really eliminate those risks. And so if you're in the business, as Joe mentioned, you have new burdens regarding risk, with especially data. And so in the years to come, you've got to really understand your risks and the risks of your customers. And you need to adjust your business to that reality. So key concepts that I wanted to highlight for you. Again, we're moving fairly quickly through this, but I wanted to make sure you understand. So we talked a little bit about environmental compliance. To provide Itad service and be certified to it, there are environmental requirements. Related to waste electronic equipment, or as they call it in Europe and in Asia, related to recycling and disposal. Batteries, for example, have huge compliance requirements just to handle a battery. So a UPS system coming out of a server cabinet has big environmental implications for you. You're subject to those laws even if you don't realize it. So that's an important reason to look at certifications, because they'll help you through that process of understanding your risks. Data security, again, we touched on that. You have liability there, in addition to eliminating the liability of the corporations that you serve. I just said the word liability, didn't I? Integrity. So I mentioned reporting and how you do business. Reporting is the deliverable that you have as a result of the integrity of your processes, the integrity of your systems. The days of bait and switch and having kind of smoke and mirrors around trading of equipment should be gone. We all know that it's still out there. One of the great things about ASCDI that I love is your ethics policy and your program around that. So I think you have an advantage right out of the gates here, that you're a step ahead on integrity versus the rest of the industry. You also have to have systems that reinforce all this. So ERP systems, data destruction systems, ways to generate the data that's in the reports, and ways to ensure that the process that you undertake is well controlled. So those systems are going to be important to your business in order to provide Itad services. Certifications underlies all of this to make sure that you have the processes in place to make sure that these things happen every time, every day, to every device, and it's effective. And so the certifications help you accomplish that. So the next slide is why do I need to be certified? Compliance needs of clients and vendors. So corporations need their service provider to be compliant. They need to be able to rely on certified companies. In some cases, the laws actually mention certification, especially in UK and Europe, and more so, and becoming more and more so in the US as well. It's a third-party endorsement. So when you go through certification, I'll go into more detail on this in a minute, a third party comes in and audits your processes, audits your security, audits your capabilities to make sure that that you're qualified to do this, that you have the capability, that you have the stringent checks and balances and systems in place to make sure that the certification is something that can be relied on. It's not you just waving a flag and saying, "Hey, I'm certified," or "Hey, I've got these great processes. I can provide ITAD services." It's a third party saying, "We agree." Market differentiation. There's always going to be companies out there that are not certified. And if you've invested in your processes, if you've invested in your company and in your brand and in your capabilities and your marketing, why not prove that through certification? And that will differentiate you from those that have not made those investments. And you want to improve your internal business. So many of the certifications have a continuous improvement element to them. It's a way of looking at your business, monitoring, measuring your business, correcting problems when they occur at the root cause level so that they don't recur, and looking for opportunities to make improvements beyond that. This continuous improvement cycle is really a way to improve your internal business. And you see companies around the world that implement certified programs. They do it not just because of market differentiation or branding. They do it because it's a way to improve their internal capabilities, the internal processes. So what are the components of certification? You need a QEH&S management system, typically. What is a management system? A management system is a set of procedures, policies, work instructions, these sorts of things that says, hey, this is what we do. But it's not just a set of documents. It's something that this is what we do, and then you do it, and then you can prove that you did it. All right, so related to quality, related to environmental aspects, related to health and safety of your workers, all of those are elements in a management system that you document, that you then perform against, and then that you document the completion of what you did. The ERP system is a great way of documenting that you completed those steps in your process. Legal requirements, yeah. Are you doing things in accordance with the regulations that you have? It's not a difficult thing to look at, but it's a core element. Environmental component. So really looking at especially downstream, where you send recyclable materials to. Not the stuff that you've tested and is going into the reuse channel, but the things that would be going into waste, that would be going into landfills if you weren't sending it to a reputable recycling processor. So that's an important part of the certification programs. And again, it's a regulatory requirement in the U.S. and Europe as well. Physical and data security. So physical security is the equipment secure from somebody taking it? Is the data on the equipment secure and effectively destroyed by your process? So those two things related to security are important. Tracking and transparency. If you're going to report on this, if you're going to eliminate risk, you've really got to be able to keep track of every step in the process, of every piece of equipment that goes through your process, and then be able to report that transparently to your customer. And then I mentioned continuous improvement as well. So that's a part of a typical management system and certification program. So what is that process? What is the certification process? And Steve will go into more depth on this with the ADISA standards specifically, but typically there's a licensing and membership aspect. So are you a member, or do you have the rights to download the standard and implement it and become certified? So there's a legal document there involved. Sometimes there's a fee involved as well. You need to actually do implement the management system, implement the policies, procedures, the documents that you have to put in place to make sure that you're doing things right, and then run it, do it. As Mikey says, just do it, right? It's take that management system, those things that you say you're going to do, and do it. And then you're going to have an internal audit or an internal assessment. Basically, you're checking yourself to make sure that you're doing it, that your employees are carrying out the instructions, carrying out the procedures. Then there's a third-party audit, that external audit, by somebody that's competent, highly qualified, that comes into your facility. They might start with an audit on the phone and via email, but eventually they're going to wind up in your facility, walking through your processes, interviewing your employees, really digging deeper into your company, into your business. If they find something, and they should, they probably will, and that's okay. It's not the end of the world. You go through a corrective action, you fix what they found, fix the problems, and then you're certified. Don't be afraid of corrective actions. Don't be afraid of the auditor finding issues. In fact, it's great to have an attitude of, I hope they do find issues, because that's part of that continuous improvement aspect is, hey, I've got a third party in my business that can scrutinize my business in a way that I don't typically. And so that extra set of eyes is a great opportunity to improve your business. And then lastly, there's recurring audits. So it may be done on an annual basis. It may be done, there may also be spot audits, surprise audits, that where the third party comes in and shows up on your door, knocks on the door and says, hey, I'm here to do a spot audit. Or it may be a scheduled thing a year later, every year. So, or every 6 months or every quarter. It kind of depends on the certification program. But that recurring audit is important, because it says that, yeah, they were certified last year, and we audited them again this year, and they're still certified. So that's the certification program in a capsule. So the next question is, hey, can I get paid to pick up hardware? The answer is yes, but today there is still an expectation of payment. Most companies, most businesses recognize there's still residual value in the equipment. So it's not like you're going to just get paid to take it and there's no return, no recovery for the corporation. But over time, they need to be prepared for that. You're providing a service. That service has value. You've invested in your business. You've invested in your processes, in the training of your employees, and you don't need to devalue that service by just offering it for free. It has a value to the client. Have them pay for it. If you do that and you focus on the service aspect of this, focus on the risks that you're eliminating for them, and focus on the expertise that you're bringing to the table that they're outsourcing to you, then you're competing with others on the quality of your service, not just on price. You're not doing bids every day saying, hey, am I got a dollar better bid for this lot than the next guy, and so that's how I'm going to win it. If you can change the conversation to the quality of service, to certifications, to the breadth and depth of your services and your capabilities and your expertise, then it's not just a commoditized price-based decision. I'll be honest, you're not always going to be successful at that. You still have to compete on price. But the quality of service helps you shift that conversation. And many corporations are cluing into this, that if they really care about their risks, if they really care about compliance and making sure that they've got the audit trail in place, that the service was provided well, then they're going to be looking for a great service provider, not just somebody that offers a dollar better. So leading advice to corporations, I mentioned Gartner research a few minutes ago. They are advising corporations today that they need to budget for this services. It's not an afterthought. They need to put it in their IT or their asset management budget, that they need to pay for ITAD services. And in the future, they should not expect as much money in value recovery as they've seen in the past. so it may not fully cover the cost of services. So as corporations need to budget for that. That's great for us as we think about service, as we talk to them about service, to be able to refer to the preeminent research firm in the industry that says, hey, they say that you need to budget for this. They say that it's not just about value recovery. So when we think about business models, you can do an upfront purchase. That's what many people do. Have done in the past when they trade. Is, hey, I'll pay you $100 for this device, and then you'll sell it for more than that on the secondary market. You hope. A better model is sort and settle. So after you receive the equipment, then you audit it. You make sure that you've got the components that you expected, that you've got a good handle on the valuation, and then you pay them based on what you've actually received and the condition that you've received it in. Consignment and revenue share is kind of that next tier. So we have many corporations that are doing ITAD services in consignment or revenue share these days. And that's a case where where the market risk for the equipment is not borne by you. The market risk, because they still own the equipment, is borne by the corporation, and you both share in the value recovery. You share in the market risk, and you share in the reward from that. It's a great cash flow position for an ITAD service provider, because you don't pay them until after you've received the payment for the equipment you resell. Each of those business models can support service fees. It just depends on your relationship with the client, how you've structured that relationship to support services. Because again, if you aren't talking about services, if you aren't talking about charging them for those services, you've devalued the investment that you've made in your business. The next slide is something I presented at the ITAD Summit a couple of weeks ago. I'm not going to go into a great deal of depth here, but it shows sort of a spectrum of players in the ITAD business, from novices that don't really have much sophistication to competitors where you have some sophistication in your services and capabilities. Leaders are typically those that serve enterprise clients with ITAD services. They have a strong set of services, and they're competing on quality, not just price. And then the transformers are those that are really innovating out there, that have taken that next step beyond what they have to do to compete, to really excel. And the level of certification as you go through these different levels also advances as you move to the right. Most companies have fingers in all of these. So, they may be novices in some areas and leaders in others. Or it really just depends on each individual business. And there's not and being to the left on the chart here does not mean it's a bad business. There are some great companies that are in that category. This is just a way to categorize and describe the spectrum of ITAD companies. So that wraps up my bit here. Just to plug my consulting for a moment. I typically work with companies that are in the ITAD business or want to be in the ITAD business, or in a complementary business of some sort. I perform a gap analysis on them. I help them with go-to-market strategies, operations, facility, processes, securities, their systems. I mentioned the ERP systems, warehouse management, customer relation management, financial systems, data erasure, all of that. The certifications, not just certification to get a plaque on the wall, but to actually better the business, create new opportunities to develop the business, and then profitable operations as a result of having certifications. And then lastly, helping them with vision and mission and how they differentiate themselves in the market. So that's what I do every day, in addition to continuing to serve on some of these industry committees related to trade and industry certifications. So with that, I will turn it back to Joe, and thank you for your time.
Reich, thank you very much. That was a great presentation. I do appreciate it. And we're going to share these slides with everybody on this call. After the call, we'll email them out to you or link to them. I strongly encourage you to reach out to Reich. He knows more about this than I could ever dream of knowing. So, Reich, thank you very much for your time and your presentation. Next up, we have Steve Mellons, who's the founder of Adissa and our partner at Itad Certifications. Steve, take it away.
Thanks very much, Joe, and thanks, Reich, for a great presentation. So my piece today is talking specifically about the Itad certification scheme, which ASCDI is offering. And I'm just going to touch on, I guess, why two organizations are working together, if I may. Adissa certification is not a bolt-on scheme. We're not like other certification schemes where you pay your money and you get an audit and you get a badge and you don't see us again until the next time. We're much more an inclusive organization where we work with our members to help them improve, work with our members on changing legislation to future-proof them, changing technology to future-proof them. It's very much a partnership as opposed to a one-time-a-year check. And the simple reason for that is security has to be about the culture. It has to be about 365, 24/7, living and breathing this. And we can't do that if we just come and dip our toe into your business one time a year. And we'll talk about how we work with organizations a little bit later when I talk about the certification process. But when we met with ASCDI, what really impressed me about the team was that very much that's how they viewed it as well. Yes, it's a membership. Yes, there is a inclusive approach to it. But the main thrust of ASCDI was to benefit the members, which is exactly the same as Adissa. And so when we got together, Joe, we hit it off straight away in terms of what we believed the industry needed. And this has culminated in this partnership whereby we're able to offer you a Itad certification, which clearly I'm biased, but an Itad certification, which I believe is the best in the market for security, through an organization which is, I think, best of breed in what it does as well. So you kind of get two great organizations in one, which is a tagline, which I think we came up in the bar once, Joe, so that's fantastic. If you could go to the next slide, I don't like doing things like this, but I'm going to build a little bit of credibility, if I may, because clearly nobody really knows me on this call or has heard of Adissa either. So a little bit of background to what we do. We've been working mainly out of the UK for the last 10 years in this area. I wrote the ICO, Information Commissioner's Office, guidance notes in 2012. The ICO is the UK data regulator, so they're the guys that come and fine companies. And we're about to formally announce that we have been accepted to start the process of becoming formally recognised by the UK Information Commissioner's Office as a compliance scheme in our area. That would mean that they formally recognise that we're able to help organisations comply with GDPR, which is the European piece, and the UK Data Protection Bill, which is the UK-based piece, which is a great feather in our cap. But for those of you who work with government will know that it always comes with slight costs, shall we say. We work with UK GCHQ, which is, I guess, the equivalent of the NSA. I sit on one of their steering groups, and it's generally one way, as it is with government, so I offer them advice, and they never offer me any, but that's typically how you work with government. And we've got a whole range of other stuff that we've done over the years to sort of be able to prove our credibility, not least that we won 2019's Compliance Award from Computer Security Magazine for helping organizations when they're disposing of their assets comply with law, and helping those companies providing those services comply with law as well. Just a little bit more about Adissa and what we'd be doing in the field. Joe, if you can scroll on to the next slide, please. We class ourselves as an evidence-based certification scheme. So we do get out and we do audit. Worldwide, we've done over 500 audits. We've tested over 3,000 devices forensically. We have found data. It's not always a good news story. So some of those audits result in a fail, others in remediation required, and some pass cleanly. So I won't go through the numbers there, but we do get out. We've audited. I've audited as far afield as Hong Kong, all the way through to San Francisco, to Reno as well out there. So we have got a pretty good understanding of where this ITAD market space is worldwide. And it isn't what it claims to be. And I think Reich's presentation was spot on. It has a little bit of a an image issue perhaps, and the clients are not aware of the real value that this industry brings, and that's the opportunity. And I've got a slide on opportunity later. And this is why I think it's an exciting time to be looking at Itad in a different way, not looking at the physical asset, but looking at the broader picture, looking at what challenges our customers have, and be able to create a service that meets those challenges. And where there's a service, there's a value, and where there's value, there's of course a price that we can allocate. And that's kind of what we think the ADISA certification scheme can really help you with, is not only giving you a badge, giving you a certificate, but actually also helping you meet like-minded people and learn from each other that Itad isn't about recycling, it's not about brokerage, it's mainly about the service of compliance, security and brand protection that your customers may not know it right now, but they know deep within their soul that that's exactly what they've been needing. So we can go through it forward one, Joe. Thank you. So why are we different? Because you've got, R2 stewards in the sector, you've got NAID, there's Wheelerbex in Europe, you've got a whole range of other stuff sitting in this space as well. The ADISA standard was written from an approach of risk management. So we didn't write an industry standard. I actually did some work with Lehman Brothers on this back in the day, where we did a risk assessment together for a huge building move in London. And it kind of started from those fledgling ideas whereby we looked at where risk might exist in the process of decommissioning equipment, preparing it for disposition, and through the logistics process into a recycling facility as they were at the time. And we looked at what countermeasures, what processes would need to be applied in order to manage that risk. And that's the whole ethos of ADISA. Our standard's very weighty, it's very different. And the 2020 standard, which has just been approved by the members, which will be released on January the 1st, it's got over 200 separate criterion. And that's because we've identified over 200 areas where risk might exist within your business. Now that can seem overwhelming, particularly when you compare it to some of the other standards and people say alongside each other. I actually have a quote, a testimonial from a guy that was very complimentary, and he said, I read the R2 standard, which is a great standard, by the way, but it isn't a security standard. But I read the R2 standard in 30 minutes and understood it. It took me 2 days to read yours, and I didn't understand it. That's both a good and a bad thing, but it does show you the level of detail that we go into. And that's really important to emphasize, because when you're trying to sell a certification, when you're trying to sell your business process, and when you're trying to sell the wraparound auditing that goes on, it does need to be really detailed, otherwise it's meaningless. It does need to ask the difficult questions, otherwise it's too easy and anybody can get it. And it does need to be professionally delivered in such a way that your client will understand the terminology that we talk about. And that's really key, is trying to get this into the mindset of the client. What we also look at is within the standards that we're very prescriptive. So if we see a risk, we look to prescribe that risk, or describe that risk, I should say, and prescribe countermeasures that you would put in place. And that's to control variation, because if we allow even an auditor to apply their own influence over the answer, then that could lead to increased risk. So we're very prescriptive, but that doesn't mean we're not real world and pragmatic. We do appreciate that in the real world, things aren't always easy, that they don't always go to plan. As Reich said earlier on, we do a lot of finger wagging in terms of if we find fault, but we always help. That's the most important thing to remember. I've got an organization that I audit their sites worldwide for the last 3 years, and they will never appear on the ADISA webpage. Well, they may do when they get there eventually, but they're using me for business improvement. So I audit them against our standard, they get a report, and they work on the remediation, and that's over 18 sites worldwide. So again, that's one of the, I guess, the things that make us a bit different. The whole ADISA certification through ASCDI isn't about getting 200 companies on board. It's not about quantity, it's about quality. I'd rather have 5 organizations on board and that they're operating to the standard consistently. And that's really important when we're talking about service. As I said a second ago, it's really important to actually be able to understand how to sell the difference between ADISA and other standards. Let's not be churlish about this. Of course, there's a revenue stream involved, but this isn't the main revenue stream for ADISA at all. If we look to try and get 200 new companies on board, I could probably get them in a matter of weeks. but I'd have to lower my standards, and that's not what we do at Adisa. Because our objective across our different parts of our business is that we want to become the brand for reassurance and for quality within the asset disposition area, both for you within the industry, and I'll talk about other things we do, but also for the product testing that we do, and also for the certification we offer clients as well. Joe, if you can just go forward one, please. So I've probably talking about the detailed and the approach that we have to making sure organizations operate to the certification, and sort of support that. We have quite a structured approach to gaining certification, and that's not to make it frightening. It isn't frightening. It's to make it sure that the journey that we go on is at the right pace. I don't want you to accelerate and stretch your business processes to get certified, because the minute that the auditor leaves the site, elasticity happens and you move back, and that means you're no longer compliant. We go on a journey together to make sure that your business is in the right shape, that you agree with us, that your operations team agree with us, that there's no processes being forced on anybody, and that means that your business should run in accordance with the standard and in accordance with certified status consistently, because actually it's running as you want it to run. And that's not part of our job. We don't want to come in, make changes. That's no good for us. I want to understand your business, and that's why we have a very lengthy application process. So that process itself, there's an inquiry to us. We do a screening process, which sounds a bit exclusive. It isn't. We just ask about motivation. You know, how have you found us? Why have you found us? Where's your business right now? Where do you see your business going? Are we going to be a good fit? It's really important about getting the relationship right at the very beginning, because if we don't, you will view us as either simply as a cost and a certificate on the wall, or you'll view us as somebody that you should be frightened of, because actually your business isn't operating to the standard. And neither of those work for us. We want to make sure at the very beginning that we're going into this in the right state of motivation and in the right state of a relationship between each other, because it should be about working together. We go through an onboarding process with you. This is before any money's exchanged hands. And I know, Wright mentioned earlier on, some of the other standards charge you to download their standard. Ours is free. I've been giving it away for free since day one. If we're about improving the performance of the sector has got to see the bar to aspire to. And I don't really understand why people should charge, or you should pay to look at a standard that you're meant to aspire to achieve. So all of this is done without any fee at this stage. And we try and size each other up and make sure that when we press go, that we're all committed and we're moving in the right direction. And at that point, when we press go, there's an onboarding plan, which we write. Every onboarding plan is unique. It takes where your business is today, where we think it is today, and it takes it to a point where there will be a physical on-site audit to do the final stage. And that onboarding plan is 3 stages. The first is the remote assessment of paperwork. The second phase is the practical physical audit, and that includes where we come and do some forensics. So that's where we take some finished goods, whether it's magnetic hard drives, solid state, phones, networking equipment, and we forensically analyze it, and then we try and see if we can recover data. Don't worry, if we do recover data, we do go back and look at root cause, and we try and fix that root cause to make sure it doesn't happen again. And all of this builds up to a position where at the end of that experience, you pass or fail your gateway audit, as we call it. Now, if you fail, it's not doom and gloom. You get a list of remediation. You go away and do it, and then we come back potentially, or if it's simple stuff, we can do it remotely, and we say, yes, you're in a good shape, and that's when you pass. And then once you pass, you go into our surveillance audit scheme, and that's where we come out unannounced, and we do a range of audits. We could do some physical audits, and that's where we may try and break into your facility. We could just do forensics, where we come and take a larger sample size, 20, 30 assets, and we start doing some forensics on those. Or it could be your process control. We look to try and go out and lift devices from your facility and say, can you tell me exactly where this has come from, etc. And the whole point of this approach to certification is that I think you'll agree that where security is concerned, if you have a single hard drive or USB stick slip through your facility, nobody's going to care about the other 350,000 that you processed. It'll be the one that makes the headline. And our job at Adisa is to try and make sure that that likelihood of it slipping through is reduced considerably. There's no such thing as absolutes in security. There isn't. What we try and do is make sure that the scheme is set up and the certified status with each organization is set up in a way that we've managed that risk to a very, very small percentage. Joe, if you could just roll on one slide, please. So once certified, how you maintain certification is via the surveillance audit approach. This is where we do have a bit of teeth, because we have a certain audit failure process. If we come on site and we find issues, if it's an obvious issue, we fix it on the site with the member. If it's not, it goes back to our audit review team. The audit review team checks the auditor's opinion. So this is what I saw, this is what I found, this is what I've been given as evidence, and we make sure that a second pair of eyes corroborates that opinion or argues internally about it to make sure it's being fair. And the simple reason for that is worldwide, I've seen huge variation in audit quality because of the auditor. And that's unfair on organizations. So what we try and make sure is that our auditors make sure that they do have a second check before we make a decision based on our findings. If we have a negative opinion, and that may be that we found something whereby the audit has been failed, it goes through a formal audit failure process. That audit failure process is designed to help you understand what we found so that you can disagree with it. If you agree with our findings, we look at what the root cause is. Once we've agreed on the root cause, we look at the remediation. And then we look at how that remediation can be implemented in a continuous way. Going back to Reich's point earlier on, it's really important about the continuous improvement. You know, nobody is perfect. Nobody is perfect from in any walk of life. This particular industry is very, very challenging because the equipment is irregular. The volumes that you receive it in are irregular. And by default, we have an awful lot of humans who behave in irregular ways. And that's why we are very pragmatic in our findings at audit. If it's not just a one strike and you're off, it's what was the cause of that? Let's fix it. If you can roll forward, Joe, again, please. I talked to you at the beginning about the relationship with our members through ASCDI. You know, we don't want to just turn up once a year and audit you. That's no good. We want to see the industry improve, because first time you go out and pitch this to your clients and say, you know, I used to take all your old equipment away and I used to just pay you for it, but now I'm going to charge you a service fee. That's a tough sell, because the client's not necessarily expecting it. What we have to do, and part of the mission for Itad is to represent Itad to the customer base, to make them aware of the risk, make them aware of their compliance wraparound, build the value from the service provider such that that sticks with the client expectation. And once we build that value, then we can start talking price. And that's really important, that just by putting a price on the front door doesn't mean people will pay it. We have to build that value first. And that's where our ongoing benefits really kick in. We have extensive training courses that we run, a mix of face-to-face online. And so people, once they're certified, get access to an awful lot of that. And that's where we talk about technology, hybrid drives. We start talking about bias lock devices. We start talking about a range of the issues that exist within the industry and how you overcome them. It's really, really important that there is a growth both at a corporate level in terms of your business growth, but also at an individual level, your employees, so that we can move on together. Wright mentioned about internal audit, really, really important. Don't wait for an auditor to find the problems. It's too late by then. We make sure that we train people internally to make sure that they are watching your back on behalf of you as well as us. So just waiting for an external auditor to come along, it's too late by then. We want to make sure that there is a advocate working within the business that understands what we're looking for, why we're looking for it, and therefore they can protect you as part of their day-to-day job. Of course, marketing is important. Most organizations are pretty decent at marketing what they do. They're not necessarily so decent at marketing why. And as an independent, we're able to adopt a little bit more of a fear campaign. And so there's a lot of issues going on at the moment. For example, in Europe, anybody who's got a European footprint, the EU's passed a law about persistent organic pollutants, which are found in plastics, more or less every plastic actually. And what they're saying is that at end of life, those plastics have to be incinerated. Joe, I know you're over this as well and looking at it. And this is hugely problematic for this particular industry. And we've taken the UK EA and therefore through to Brussels to task over this. And this is very much what we view our role to be. Where we're trying to create the right type of noise with government, the right type of marketing collateral talking to your customers, the right type of training for your employees. It's really important that we have that type of relationship. And there's a couple of other sort of bolt-on options, if you like. We're creating an Itad store, which is where you can go and buy products to support your business, and that may be GPS tracking, it might be CCTV, it might just be staff vetting, all that type of stuff. And we're slowly building that portfolio up in the UK right now, and we've just started the process in the US. They'll be coming online in Q3 next year for you guys in the States. We're launching a marketplace with Auction Technology Group, which are a very, very big, although I'd never heard of them, organization run by a former CEO of eBay. Hugely impressive organization. I think eBay fees are too high, if I'm honest. It's not my job to say that for eBay. And this marketplace that we have, it's being created with the sole objective of being able to help you sell B2 consumer as opposed to sort of B2B and trading it. So actually getting you higher returns for your equipment. We actually look at the quality of equipment as part of our audit process, make sure the quality on the site is there, and it enables you to get better return, because the hard bit's getting the equipment, and if we're selling just to trade, we're giving margin away. And so the idea of the market space is that we're really trying to connect you with buyers of this equipment to improve your margins considerably. And we're launching in 2020 a DESA certified enterprise status, and that concludes our mission, if you like, to improve the performance within this business process. And there's reseller options for that. I've been working with a couple of US organizations over the past 6 months. We've been piloting it, one worldwide law firm. And so we've learned exactly how bad it is in the real world and how we can help put it right. And there's some great opportunities there to sell through to your customers to make them become better. And we want intelligent customers because they ask intelligent questions, which means an intelligent service will resonate more with them. And it's really important that the education process doesn't stop just internally at the industry. And if you could go forward, please, Joe. And this is how we see this is our strategy. This is where we see risk being managed within the end of life piece. There's inside risk at your customers, internal theft. Coca-Cola had a whole load of laptops stolen from one of their system administrators. You have technical risk. So are the tools on the media, the software, are they fit for purpose? And we tested, we run an OEM's global program for that. And we've tested over 60, 70 products now, and they've not all passed, which is the shocking thing. So DESA very much is looking at both the enterprise, your customers, both the product set, and then finally, which we're here to talk about today, which is the asset recovery certification, the Itad certification. I think together those three manage the risk within the whole asset disposition piece, from your client's point of decommission through to the point where you can recycle or reuse that asset. And I think that's it for me, because I had just a quick 10 minutes and I think I've run over. I want to very quickly touch on the opportunity. Sorry to run over, I always do. The opportunity for a service provider looking at Itad or a recycler looking at Itad differently is to look at the competition. Wright touched on this earlier on, and I totally agree. The sector's it's reasonably immature, and this is worldwide. It's got a little bit of a lack of identity, and it lacks confidence. It's too happy just to adopt a dollar per skid approach. I have a procurement team, not a sales team. I'm not selling a service, I'm buying an asset. There's not a lot of attraction in that industry, and that's why it's really good, because actually your customers' requirements are changing. The increase in regulation, and more to the point, the regulatory act, because there is an awful lot of law already in place. It's people now beginning to get fined. FTC in particular in the States are active in this area. So it's the increase in financial risk, which is getting businesses to look at all of their data exposure, all their privacy issues. The clients, as they become more aware, they become more intelligent and they start asking more questions. Again, to reference Reich earlier on, you've got to be certified. Certified against what? Just because people have a certification, it doesn't necessarily mean it's protecting their customers from anything. And within the sales process, we help educate our certified companies about how to sell over, for example, ISO 27001, which is an international standard. But within this particular business transaction, if you just look for that badge, you're leaving yourself widely exposed unless that particular certification has been complied with in a certain way and the audit process has been done correctly. And so what we look for is to make sure that just because clients are aware, that they just don't go badge collecting. And so we try and help you be able to help them differentiate between a need for a particular certification or badge within their supply chain. Really good important thing for us as well is that not only is it the regulatory act, because at the end of the day, the law is the law. We probably all speed, But you only speed when you get caught, and this is where a lot of organizations treat data protection. That's fine. It cost me too much money. I'll wait till I get caught. Well, regulators have been pretty impotent over the years for actually imposing fines. That does seem to be changing worldwide. There's more appetite to take on organizations now, but the lawyers have been active, and we're looking at really significant class action lawsuits being pulled together. There's one in the UK at the moment against a supermarket, which is about £6 million for a data breach, not within the Itad piece, but for a data breach which I think the client couldn't have done anything about. So it's a huge amount of financial exposure from the regulators, from the lawyers, and Reich was bang on earlier on, Target always come up, Sony always get referenced. British Airways are about to be hit with a £250 million fine, £250 million, and this is opportunity. Because you've got scared customers, you've got scared clients. Now, I don't like selling on fear. I think selling on fear is a bit cheap. But actually, your clients are themselves going through this awakening. What do we do with our data? How are we protecting it on the network? Who are we buying our infrastructure from? Who's using it? Who do we share it with? And actually, what are we doing at end of life? Don't know. We give it to the highest bidder. That doesn't seem to be great behavior. Doesn't mean that it's wrong, because if the highest bidder is doing a great job, then their risk is being managed. I'd like to suggest that's probably not necessarily the case. And as we see the awakening within our clients, they're going to be looking at the supply chain. And in my opinion, the supply chain at the moment is not well equipped to deal with this. And I know because it was on one of the earlier slides, we've had over 276 applications in the last 2 years, as it is, since the beginning of 2018. We've only had 11 pass. That shows you how exclusive we are, also how tough we are, but also where the industry is. Because that means you've got a huge number of motivated people who just can't get to that standard. And this is where consultants come in and help, because that bridge, that gap can be too big sometimes, too daunting. You might not even understand the language. But actually, once you understand this, it isn't that challenging. And this is where I think the real opportunity is. So on that, I know I've overrun, Joe. I'm sorry. Thanks for the opportunity, as ever.
Steve, thank you too. Thank you very much. We have just a few. We'll just be another couple of minutes. We have a few questions. Let me throw them out, and Steve or Reich, just feel free to jump in. First question was: estimate what percentage of ITAD companies would pass this process, including what percentage would pass? Is really the question.
In the US?
Yeah, let's go US.
I'm talking on a US webinar, so I have to be very careful. Very few, single digit.
Yeah.
We're not about a volume here, and I've been working with companies in the States for the last 8 years, and there's some great companies, really, really good companies, but there's a huge amount of risk within their process, and this is why the scheme's valuable, because if it was easy, everybody'd get it, and there's no USP in that.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Steve. I would also say that it's not unattainable, though. Your standard's great and really steps them right through what they've got to do to achieve certification. So I think it's just a question of whether these companies are serious about attaining it and improving their businesses to stand out in the marketplace. So, but I would agree that it's a low percentage today, right out of the bat. I think there's opportunity there.
Yeah, and Joe, just to add to that, and I know people have got things to do, it isn't unobtainable. Reich's absolutely correct. If you actually look at the standard, and I recommend looking at the 2020 when it's released on January the 1st, maybe Joe, we can distribute that. It's actually real world. It's what you guys do. It talks about engaging with your customers. It talks about collecting. It talks about asset management. It talks about sanitization. It's not talking about science fiction. It's more a reflection of where the industry is as opposed to this particular standard, how few companies are there. And that's the opportunity. If we were playing a popularity contest, a DISA and an ASCDI ITAD certification wouldn't win. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
Because if I'm selling on quality, then I want to make sure that means something. And I want to make sure that when I'm talking to my clients about certified status, that the first thing I can say is, hey, there's only a dozen of us.
Yep.
It's so tough.
And next one is just more really just a comment. One of our participants said, I removed 600 drives from a medical facility last year, was allowed to put them on a common carrier and move them to Atlanta for wiping and certification. It was shocking to me, the fact that I guess that these drives went on a common carrier.
Yeah, it's all too common, Joe, to be honest. And that's the education piece. That's not certification. That's not a service provider's issue. That's a client making a really bad decision because they are either not the stakeholder within the client to make a better decision, or they're not aware of the risk that they're taking, or they don't care. All of those things are part of the ADISA mission, if you like, the ADISA CDI mission, which is to help educate the client not to make such a dumb decision.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And the last comment I have here is, and I'm trying to let me read it, but I'm not sure I'm following it. It says, I think if everyone knows what they are bringing to the table, above all, common ITAD offerings out there, it would compel them to move forward in this direction. I think the question is focusing on, why, again, in which you covered a lot, both of you guys did, why get ITAD certified? What does an ITAD certification company bring to the table? I think that was that question.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a great observation, Joe. As these companies move into services, specifically ITAD services, to have a certification that says that they're qualified and professional about providing those services, it is somewhat of a no-brainer. Let's get certified. Let's make sure that the investments that we're making in the business are recognized and are best in class. If you do that, then being able to talk about certification, being able to talk about how you address risk, is the core of being an ITAD service provider.
And one last one that just popped up: is there a list of U.S. certified ITAD companies?
Sure. Certified against what is probably the question. If you go to the R2 site, they've got a nice map, because I've ripped the idea off about 5 years ago. If you go to adisa.global, we've got a nice map you can look at. I think eSteward has as well. So it's certified against what most, NAID definitely has. So if you go to any of those websites, you can look and perambulate around it and find certified companies. You'll notice we've got the less, and that's for reasons that we've talked about earlier on, certainly in the US.
That's great. Reich, Steve, I want to thank you very much for a very interesting and educational webinar today. And I want to thank you all for participating. We will email out a copy of the webinar, the slides, to everybody after we hang up. And I want to thank you all, and especially want to wish everybody a very happy and healthy holiday.
Thanks, Joe.
You all,
thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
You have a good rest of the day.